So it's April 4th, and I'm here with Kathleen and April, ready to talk about Arkham Asylum. I think I may end up making 2 tapes, but half as long. This is my idea for the moment. The cover of the book that I have looks like this. Yours is probably different because you probably bought a more recent edition.
Mine is this version.
Right, the 25th anniversary. And that's the one I advise students to buy because it's available for very cheap.
Is mine longer, like in height, than the average book?
I think not. I think it's
It's about the same. Okay. Because I was like, is this just oddly constructed, or is that he meant it to be this tall and narrow?
Yeah, it's a trade paperback. I mean, it's a slightly unusual size.
Mhm.
And it's in keeping with the Gothic architecture in general.
Yes.
Those high arches and like narrow, cramped corridors kind of thing.
Mhm.
Like when you open up the book and look inside, and I'll just do a share screen and put my dock camera on. When you open up and look at it on the inside, the earliest panels that we get mirror that Gothic tall narrowness.
Right.
So usually in my typical semester, if I have assigned this book, for some people, it's their favorite book of the semester. And like, finally, we got to the superheroes. And for other people, it's their least favorite book of the semester. Superheroes are not especially my thing, or maybe even Batman should not be called a superhero exactly,
Right.
because he doesn't have supernatural powers, or he's not an alien or something. He's just a guy with a lot of money who spent a lot of time training.
Mhm.
But whether he's a superhero or not, he's still one of those men in the DC universe. And that's not especially my thing, and I'm not a particular expert in it. But as Batman stories go, this is a very, very literary Batman story. And another thing, usually in a class like this, I usually use very recently published work. But this is a classic. It first came out in 1989. And there are things about this book that you can see that definitely would have been done differently in later decades. The kind of imputation that cross-dressing men are inherently insane and criminal.
Mhm.
That would not be a thing that an author would do if this book were just being published now or in the last decade, So and you can definitely see that, attitudes have moved on since this book was first published. On the other hand, it was like a super bestseller at the time, and people kept on being interested in and keep on being interested in it even now. And it is like studied from a literary perspective, and there are like cliff notes available for this book. So it's like a crossover in that sense. It's one of the comics that managed to get itself into the literary canon that people study as literature. Anyway, so the things that make it interesting to like a scholar of literature, like the structures of symbolism and all that, that's not necessarily why I assign it in a class like this, a workshop class. I'm more interested in pointing out, rather than the symbol structures of it all, which it's amazing, those structures, and we could spend a long time, delving into it and showing how all these fit together. But I'm like more interested in it for reasons of things like page layout and how the author handles bringing us through time on the comics page. And use of some of the sort of the typical technical devices of comics, like speech balloons. For instance, you may have noticed there's two timelines going on in parallel in the book. Even if you're only partway in, you've seen that much already. It begins in like 1901 and centers around this boy, Amadeus Arkham. And we see him as a boy here. And then later we see him grown up. And his mother has just died, and now it's 1920. So that's the one time track, is this, where Amadeus Arkham is our focal character. And he's narrating his own story in the first person, as you can see in these narration boxes, caption boxes. Okay. And then the other time track is modern Gotham City, centered on Batman. And so it starts here where he's in the police commissioner's office. I don't know if the two of you know anything about Batman. Are you like Batman newbies?
I'm not a newbie, but it's been probably 4 decades since I was reading all of that sort of thing with my
Right.
brother.
Right.
For me, I know like a good amount, not a lot, but a good amount. I grew up with the animated series when it was coming out. So most of the stuff that I know is from the series.
Okay. So you're familiar with Commissioner Gordon,
Yes.
at least, maybe Two-Face
Yes.
and the Joker.
Yes.
There's been a whole lot of Batman villains over the years.
Yes.
And when I taught this course in an undergrad comics as literature course, and I spent 3 weeks on it back then, I sent people to the Batman villains Wikipedia page, because it does help sort out who some of these strange characters are if you never heard of them before. The Joker is sort of like the most important arch nemesis in the Batman universe, but there's a whole bunch of other ones.
Isn't Poison Ivy one of them?
Oh yeah, she doesn't show up in this particular book.
And the Riddler.
Right. And we don't see the Riddler in here either, or if we do, he's a bit part player way in the background of a crowd scene. Penguin also, I don't think we see.
Yeah, Penguin.
But others. So Batman's speech balloons are always white letters on a black background.
Mm-hmm.
That is just characteristic. That is the way he speaks in this book. And sort of ordinary normie type people always have the conventional white background with black letters in it. And then the Joker, when we get to the part where he's speaking, he's got this incredible font that may even be difficult for some people to read.
It was difficult to read.
Okay.
Even with glasses, I was like, I missed some of the words. I couldn't tell.
Yeah, these books were not made for the aged.
No.
Even the past 40 crowd. That's when your close-up vision starts to go right around age 40, and people begin to need reading glasses at that age. Anyway, if you can't read it in this font, you can flip to the back and check it out in the script.
I'll do that from now on.
Well, I flip backward and forward all the time when I'm rereading this to check out, because the one key and interesting thing about this book, and why I like to assign it, especially in a making comics type class, is it's not by a single author. Grant Morrison is the author of the words part, or what you might say, the composition in general, the idea is his. And then Dave McKean is the guy who does the illustrations. If you are a comics fan at all, you will have heard of Dave McKean before. He does a lot of comic book art, particularly famous for covers. He's one of my favorite artists of all time, Dave McKean. Anyway, that's another reason this book is a pleasure to me. Even if I don't love every single thing about it. I think it's an amazing artwork, don't get me wrong, but there's things about it that I find troubling also, and I'll point out at least one of them. So Grant Morrison is the first to tackle this, and he writes this script and hands it over to Dave McKean, and then Dave McKean makes something out of it. And in a lot of cases, Dave McKean did not do exactly what Grant Morrison told him to do. And I think that's a good thing. I think if you are working with an artist to create something, and all that artist does is mindlessly follow what you told them to do, like a recipe, it's going to be boring. If you've got an artist that is worthy, of your writing, you need to give that person a little freedom to be a co-creator. Because I think this book is better than it would have been because of the influence of David McKean, and Dave McKean using his own judgment in some cases. One of the earliest places where that shows is this. So we've got the Arkham timeline introduced to Arkham at age 10 or so in 2001. Setting the scene. And then we've got the Batman timeline starting up. And I think we can assume, we know for a fact it's April 1st. I think we can assume that the year is approximately the actual year that this book was first published, which is 1989. So we're in 1989-ish. And you can partly tell that by the telephone equipment, Technology has moved on since this type of speakerphone. And back in the back, where Grant Morrison is describing this scene to Dave McKean so he can draw it, Grant Morrison doesn't even know what a speakerphone is called. Like, the kind of thing I mean, and he talks about it, but it's not even familiar enough to him to be able to. So this is like cutting edge technology in 1989. Anyway, so this is the 1989 timeline beginning here, but it's a little bit folded on itself. These vertical stripes that the 2-page spread is divided into, these lighter colored ones, well, they're lighter in a way, but also they're grayscale. And then there's these darker ones, but also there's some blue in it. And it's a heck of a pattern, isn't it?
Yes.
That's nice to have on the wallpaper of your man cave.
Yeah.
This is the stuff that happened in these lighter stripes happened before the stuff in the darker stripes. I mean, logically, this is Batman showing up at Arkham Asylum, like looking at the plaque on the ground, and like messing around with what is this white stuff,
Yeah, I asked myself when I got to that point, I'm like, am I
Right.
to realize what that is yet? No,
Well-
not for a couple more pages.
Yeah, that eventually every mystery is solved more or less. But these things that are happening in the blue stripes logically can't happen until all of the white stripes stuff happens first. And in the script Grant Morrison presents in the back of the book, that's the way he does it. He just presents it chronologically. Okay, all of this stuff happens, and then all of this stuff happens. So I don't know whose idea it was. but I wouldn't be surprised if it was Dave McKean's own idea to take those initial scenes from later in the Morrison script and just shuffle them right in alongside. And I think it enhances it. The page layout is stunning. And it doesn't, it's okay. It makes it slightly more difficult to process, but not a lot more. Okay. It's probably worth, in a literature class, I might, try to point out every Pearl reference that we get. And Grant Morrison even suggests that as kind of like a quiz question in the back part of the book when you get to there. It's the reader to find all of my Pearl references throughout the story. Well, this is the first one. One of the hostages that the lunatics who have taken over the asylum, the Joker, basically, the Joker is the ringleader. Because so he's got this girl named Pearl. She's 19 years old, and he threatens that he's gonna stab her eyes out with a sharpened pencil, right? And this is the leverage that he has to get Batman to do what he wants.
I was wondering later on if it was to have leverage or if it was to create a situation where he could do his whole April Fools.
Yeah, well, yes. The Joker has a warped sense of humor throughout the Batman universe. And this particular version of the Joker in exactly this book is even more manic and with a sexually sadistic streak than the average Joker. So yeah, April Fool, I did not blind Pearl. He does later though, like randomly shoot somebody. So it's not
that feels to me more in line with his character, is to just wield a gun and poof and done, than to get him bloody.
This Joker is a more subtle person. This is a Batman story for more intellectual people than average, maybe. Anyway, the Joker thought it would be, in this case, even funnier to not carry out the threat. Okay. And then we get that ratcheted up to a certain level of tension, and then it's back to the other timeline again. And here's Amadeus Arkham again. So it's two timelines running in parallel. But timeline number 2 got folded in on itself a little bit, so that temporarily there were 3 timelines, but one was really just a subset of the other. And then from that point onward, it goes back and forth between the two. But this is a spoiler alert. The caption boxes on the Arkham timeline, they will later be revealed to be excerpts from his journal.
Oh.
So this dude has been keeping a journal for many years, and that's where these words are being drawn from, is his journal. In the verbal part, the verbal track. But of course, in the imagistic track, what we're seeing is like in flashback, like this, you are now in 1920, and this is what it looked like when he walked in the front door of his house. And, oh, my mom just died and I inherited the house. Okay. I think the page layouts are so intriguing, and this is Dave McKean. Nothing in Grant Morrison's script suggests this, that he makes these narrow panels laid on top of some other background. And the other background is this weird disturbing, like clockwork gears on this page. And I think it's that way on every page in the Arkham
Yeah.
version, that we're like looking through these panels to some other suggestive.
Is it like broken time?
Yeah. Possibly, yeah. And some of what's going on here is the comparison of here's what's happening in the 1920s versus here's what is happening in the 1980s,
Mhm.
more than half a century later. And there's more than one place where there's a suggestion of there could be some kind of slippage between the two times.
Mm.
The location is the same on both timelines. It's the Arkham house.
Right. I gathered that for maybe a few pages after this. That I
Right.
figured it out.
And people who know Batman are familiar with Arkham Asylum already. But the Grant Morrison invents new things to go with Arkham Asylum. He invents this entire backstory. When I think Arkham Asylum was not introduced until the 1970s. I could be wrong about that. Somebody can Google it up and tell me if I'm wrong. And presumably the writers who introduced Arkham Asylum into the Batman universe, probably they meant it as an homage to H.P. Lovecraft and his town of Arkham. But Grant Morrison has invented this whole other explanation for, oh, well, Arkham was a guy's name. And in fact, the asylum is named the Elizabeth Arkham Asylum for Amadeus Arkham's mother. I forget why I was.
I like how the page you just left had the blue lighting, the hue over everything, and how it kind of continued to capture that one picture,
Yes.
but by boxing in
Yes, yeah.
focused, and then the very next one is this whole other person's kind of in the same pattern of smaller, more
Yeah.
like, except this one got further away where the other one got closer.
Right, yes. Good noticing. And the blue tones, the blue palette here matches the blue palette of the previous pages, even though it's on the other timeline.
Right.
And there are a lot of timeline to timeline parallels, including the scarring on this guy's face.
I was wondering what that was.
Well, I mean, I don't know how he got the scars. He was abused in childhood, so that could be the explanation, or maybe he cut himself, since we know he's a cutter. But it would be unusual and difficult to cut yourself in a scar that way.
Mhm.
But his face is similar in some ways to Two-Face
Yes.
in the modern timeline. And he has some other things in common with Two-Face too. I mean, apart from the scarring, this dude is a really handsome man.
Yeah, I agree.
He's incredibly good looking, and so is Harvey Dent from that one profile side.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm like looking like, is that him? But it's hard to tell because there's so much going on with him in the asylum by the time he's reading tarot cards. You can't make heads or tails of what he looks like normally.
I don't think we're supposed to think that is him reincarnated or whatever.
Oh, it says it's Martin Hawkins.
Yes, this
I forgot about
person,
that. Mad Dog, yeah.
yeah. But I mean, if you think of Two-Face as a major Batman villain on the previous timeline, then this guy is the major villain and antagonist on the past timeline.
Of
So
course.
they fill the same role.
Of course. Yeah, that makes sense.
This is another page that is really interesting to talk about from a literary perspective. There's a lot of Freudian imagery going on in this book with respect to tunnels. Y'all know what I mean by Freudian and tunnel?
I mean, I know Freud is I know what Freud is, but I don't know about like the definition of Freudian anything.
Okay. So you can look at Freud's Wikipedia page if you want to get a quick and dirty intro. And for an even quicker and dirtier intro, I will tell you that Freud had a notion that it's sort of built into people that sex is on their minds all the time, even if they think it's not.
Mm.
And anything that's long and thin.
Oh, like the obelisk?
Yeah, can be identified as being phallic.
Okay.
And anything that is tube-shaped or womb-shaped, right, can be identified as being emblematic of female sexuality.
Okay.
So anytime you think tunnel, think vagina.
Okay.
Anytime you think hidden locked room, think womb.
Okay.
Anytime you see spear or whatever, anything that shape, you know, it's a stand-in for a penis, according to. So tunnels show up a lot.
See, I looked at that and I thought that that was the front head of the devil.
Okay.
With like his hair, and it was like irony to say tunnel of love, where it was more like a tunnel to evil.
Well, it does not look very appetizing, does it?
No, definitely.
It's scary. It's partly heart-shaped, you know, but with the edges cut off, but you can see roughly heart shape in there. And because this is a dream sequence, it doesn't have to be realistic. I mean, a lot of times at a fair or something like that, or an amusement park, they'll have a ride called Tunnel of Love that you have either of you ever gone on one of those things, one of those Tunnel of Love?
No. I've just seen them in movies where they get in the
right. I don't know if they still have them. It's associated in my mind with kind of antique things. And I don't recall ever having seen anything like that when I was a kid at an amusement park, but then I wouldn't have been old enough to do Tunnel of Love anyway.
No.
It's basically an opportunity for teenagers to have a makeout session.
Mm-hmm.
It's quiet and dark, and they have the cars or whatever separated far enough that you have a little bit of privacy and go through and just like a horror ride, but for sex instead of horror. And there will be romantic things in the background, I guess. Like I said, I've never been on one, and I think of it as kind of this old-fashioned idea. But this is not what that would really look like. I mean, this little boy, this pre-pubertal boy, is standing in front of what combines aspects of a Valentine red heart and aspects of womanly pubic hair.
Right.
And the like entrance to a vagina.
Right.
And he's, you know, it's not appealing to him at all. It's terrifying. If you look in the script at what Grant Morrison described that he wanted to be drawn here, he describes it at great length, and the description doesn't look, or like the mental image that you get from reading the description is not very much like this at all. But I think this is better. I think this is really sizzling stuff. It's important to, if you're like accumulating an account of the symbols in this book, the mirror should probably be mentioned too. We see the mirror first on the very first page of the text proper. There's this half globe shaped mirror on the staircase, and he sees his own face in it on the way up. And then half a century or more later, Batman sees his face in the same mirror. Anyway, so mirrors are a thing. Tunnels are a thing. Let's see.
Would mirrors be a reference to the looking glass? Kind of like
Yeah.
I believe the Lewis
Yeah.
Carroll reference that was in the beginning.
Absolutely. Good job.
Kind of to insinuate that they're all mad there.
Yeah. Well, there are a lot of what you might call reference texts that this book is in an intertextual relationship with. And Through the Looking Glass is one of them. Or Through the Looking Glass and Alice in Wonderland sort of together. But yeah, good spotting.
It kind of made me question. Like I said, I haven't read all of it yet, but when the kid noticed his face in the looking glass, the mirror, it made me think that maybe he's worried, or it's a matter of time that he ends up like the mom. But I'm not necessarily sure yet. But
Yeah.
it kind of has that insinuation.
Yeah, well, I mean, the fear of insanity is a powerful fear. So then sort of the basic thinking of Freud and Jung is another thing that if you know something about that, it can enhance your reading of this text. And then the tarot cards are another major sort of source of mythological significance of this narrative. Okay. So in the usual, I almost said the real Batman world. In the Batman universe that we're used to, Harvey Dent Two-Face has this coin that he uses. He's a dualistic thinker, Harvey is. You know, the world boils down to good and evil, and every time he's gonna decide what to do, he flips the coin, and he'll do the evil thing if the scarred face comes up, and the good thing if the non-scarred face comes up. But the shrinks in this version of Arkham Asylum, they're trying to get him to become a more morally complex person. And so they take the coin away and give him first a die and then a deck of tarot cards for decision-making purposes. And the plot really hinges on this. There's a suggestion that the psychiatrist, Ruth Adams, this character's name is, that it's wrong for her to have tried to change Dent in that way, to like complexify his good versus evil thinking. Anyway, it harmed him, and Batman is certainly critical of her methods, you know. But in my own real life as a teacher of literature, I can't help but identify with this shrink to some extent, even though I can see the text is pushing me to think of her as being misguided, right, and doing a wrong thing here. But it sure seems a lot to me like what I try to do to get my students to push a little further away in their own narrative work from ideas of, it's very simple, these things are good, these things are evil. It's a fight to the death between those two things, good and evil. I'm like, the world is more complicated than that. In the tarot deck, there are certain cards in particular that are important and that he keeps coming back to, and one of them is the Tower. Yeah, I guess I shouldn't dwell on that. That's really not what I want to spend the time on. Okay, I'm flipping forward fast. So I may get beyond the point where you guys have read to. Here's the scene I mentioned earlier. So he didn't actually poke out Pearl's eyes, even though he said he had. But here he randomly kills this security guard just for the hell of it. Just like to start off the hide and seek game, right? Like you're firing a gun for the start of a race.
Right.
1, 2, 3, go. And kills this guy dead. So if you're tempted to think the Joker is less of a villain than usual, think again. This is, okay, the hide and seek game begins and Batman is on his way up the stairs. And he sees his face in the mirror, and that's interleaved with flashbacks to his memories of his childhood. And this is the Batman story, right? How the early trauma that led him to become Batman in the first place, of his parents being killed by basically a random mugger. He remembers that incident from his childhood and an even earlier time, which I think this part of it has been invented by Grant Morrison to make it a little bit more Freudian. Anyway, he sees his face in the mirror, and then there's this haunting panel dropped in there from the other timeline. Like, is that like what? A time echo from 60 years before? Or actually closer to 80 years before. It's not clear like what that's doing there. And one of my interpretive questions about this text is, do we have to interpret it that there's something supernatural going on here? Right? Are we still with Batman in 1989? And is he seeing this too, like we are? Or is this just, you know, the narrator or the implied author reminding us, look, this is an echo of that same scene, but 70-something years in the past. Anyway, it'll never happen again because Batman breaks the mirror. And then, and I don't think this is fully motivated by the plot. Batman stabs himself with a broken shard of the mirror. And you know, if I had been the publisher, I would have tried to get Grant Morrison and Dave McKean to tone this down. This is so gory and so violent. And if you read everything in the back, apparently this is more Dave McKean than it is Grant Morrison. Grant Morrison was going to have Batman give himself a little stab to kind of snap himself out of the mental funk he was in. Mm-hmm. You know, bring himself back to reality, like, oh, this will work for that. But he's really,
this is more like gratuitous punishment.
I hate to look at it almost. It's so violent. And another thing is, it's being made by, this is actually paint, I believe. This is prior to the age of digital painting, right? So it's Dave McKean is getting in there with brush and oil paints to make these images. It's beautiful in a way. Again, if you weren't thinking blood and gore, this is very attractive if you're just looking at it in terms of shape and color, right? And so there's something about, like, this is a major question that I think every artist should pose to themselves if they're doing a scene involving violence and blood. Am I aestheticizing this violence? Anyway, with symbolism, I mean, obviously, these wounds mirror the wounds of Jesus. And Batman even shouts out Jesus as he's nailing himself through his own palm. I thought of an alternative reading for this scene. Like, why does Batman do this? Just like it's self-harm, you know, he's trying to change his mood by, in effect, cutting, right? But another explanation that I thought of a couple of years ago is maybe it's a Hansel and Gretel type of thing. He's been let loose in this house, which is famously mazy, and it's a hide and seek situation. And maybe he's thinking, if I leave a trail of blood drops, I'll be able to find my way back. That explanation makes more sense to me than just he was in a weird psychological state, so he snapped himself out of it by doing this. But I can't find any evidence for that in Grant Morrison's own writing, so maybe it's just me trying to make a story I like better. All right. There are incredibly violent things happen on both timelines. Here is Clayface, who is a regular Batman villain, although not one of the most frequently seen ones. And that this is a sort of a different version of him than usual too. See how he's making his way down the corridor and there's like graffiti here saying Tunnel of Love.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, 1989, think AIDS. AIDS era. So and the Clayface villain has his own backstory, and I forget what it is. You can look it up if you care. But there's a strong suggestion here of this is a person who has a venereal disease, you know, who is dying of a venereal disease.
Going back to that nailing his hands earlier, Batman, this could also be another biblical reference in the case of lepers.
Yeah. I mean, the idea of sickness and contamination,
yeah,
goes back for forever, you know, in human history since, or at least since people have been living in cities, or you know, towns and villages even. It may not have been much of a thing for hunter-gatherer tribes. But the idea of sickness as a punishment for sin goes back a long way. And that, like, venereal disease is like God's punishment on you for having sex, kind of thing. Well, anyway. This Batman is more violent than the kids' version of Batman I'm used to from reading DC comics in my youth. Here, he breaks the guy's leg in a way that is probably going to be permanently crippling. That's not the Batman I'm used to, you know. This is a really seriously out of control Batman, and then he pushes a dude in a wheelchair down a flight of stairs. Not nice. Here's another place. I'm going to mention this one more thing about Tunnel of Love and all. Because people might not realize it if I don't help. So he's coming up to yet another like room with hideous things behind it, hideous, scary villains behind the next door. And this, another piece of graffiti and another drawing of a tunnel shape or a Gothic arch, right? And written above it, these words are in Greek. In Greek, they say gnothi sauton, which means know thyself in Greek. But the Greek letters, Dave McKean has manipulated it. This is supposed to be a capital gamma in Greek, but Dave McKean stretches out the top bar of it so it looks more like a T. And this is the Greek N, and he's manipulated that so it looks a little bit like a. It's actually not a perfect drawing of a nu either, but never mind. You can interpret this as the word tunnel, spelled slightly strangely. You can read this as Tunel, right? You probably weren't up to this page.
No.
So you can, in Greek, you read this as gnothi, but you can sort of also see the word tunnel there in slightly warped letters of the Latin alphabet, which we use to write English. And there it is. Know yourself, and here's the tunnel. And so this idea of going into a tunnel or a cave. There's a sexual element in it. There's an element of danger, and there's a parallel with being born. Right? We every single human being emerges into the world of the breathing through a tunnel. Actually, that's not quite as true as it used to be, because plenty of people have C-sections, but it used to be near universal that everybody has to get born by going through a dark tunnel, you know?
Mm-hmm.
It's a mortal challenge to go into or come out of the tunnel. All right. This is the last thing I'll say before I say goodnight. At this place on the timeline, spoiler alert, sorry, Arkham Asylum has, the man, Amadeus Arkham, has already lost his entire family to serial killer Mad Dog Hawkins, and he himself killed Mad Dog Hawkins in his turn. And he's just trying to go on and live some kind of life, and he took some mushrooms here, Amanita mushrooms, which apparently I don't know that much about this, but apparently it's hallucinogenic and also like sort of way more dangerous and poisonous than the usual mushrooms that people do, psilocybin mushrooms. Anyway, he drops mushrooms and then he goes to the theater, and then he has this intense hallucination, which he recounts in his diary. And then, meanwhile, on the parallel timeline, Batman is just about to encounter another villain, Killer Croc. Okay. This is an incredibly important page. I'll go ahead and point it out in advance. Batman sees blood spatters leading up to the edge of the wall and then just suddenly ending. And so he realizes that there has to be some kind of hidden passage or doorway and something behind where this wall comes to. Anyway, it's while he's noticing that Killer Croc creeps up on him. But this is the place where the two timelines merge and blend, because the narration continues from Arkham's timeline. Arkham's journal continues narrating what happened to him while he was having his horrible hallucination. But meanwhile, what we're seeing through the panels presented to us by the monstrator is Batman's present experience. So the words are coming from 1920 something, but the action is unfolding in 1980s. And look how the panel borders are breaking down too, in a hallucinatory way. As a university professor and authority figure, obviously I myself have never done any illegal drugs or anything illegal in my entire life. However, I understand from other people's report that this kind of visual squigginess and like the bending and curving of what are ordinarily straight lines is one of the effects of taking hallucinogenic drugs. Can be. They just seem to sort of melt off the page, right? Arkham hallucinating and Batman in a life or death fight for his life. And again, there's a lot of Christian symbolism going on. Christian and also Nordic mythology. But of course, there are parallels among all the mythologies.
Mm-hmm.
You know, there, Odin Allfather, years before Christ was thought of, underwent something similar to a crucifixion. Okay, that's, like I said, I may make one more video to talk about sort of how this ends and some of the things that happened then. But I think we've done enough for one day. I think that it's really intense and interesting to see how the two timelines have blended, and the narration of one weirdly manages to describe the action taking place in the other. Do you guys have any questions or anything else you want to point out from the parts you've been through already?
So, my notes.
So on the quiz, I'll probably ask something about tunnels. I'll mention a couple of tunnel things and invite the students to point out another tunnel on a different page.
I wouldn't say it's a page, but the cover of my book is actually very different than the one presented. I think I bought the wrong issue. Mine is
no.
Oh.
You're the one who has the right one. I'm the one that has the wrong one.
Oh.
Hold up to the camera, would you? Yeah, that's the one I expected everybody to buy. I unfortunately didn't have a copy of that with me. I only have this, so that's what I had to work with. But the contents are the same, other than that your book might have some extra stuff in it that my book doesn't have.
Okay.
So
it
no
made
problem.
me kind of wonder. I thought, what if there's part of the quiz later that we have to analyze?
No. It's exactly the reverse. You're the one that has the correct book, and I'm the one that has the wrong book.
And I have the only book I found at the library.
Right.
But it has the same things she's going over.
Yeah. Your book, Kathleen, it does have the entire script in it, right? at the
Yes.
back after the, okay. So then you have everything you need.
Yes, and it has additional storyboards, thumbnails, and cover art for different editions.
Right. Good. So you not only do you not have less than you need, you have more than you need.
Nice.
Anything else on your mind? Do you like the book?
I think it's pretty cool so far. I'm one of those that does kind of like the superhero ones most of the time, to be
Okay.
honest. But seeing how this has more of a serious connotation and feeling to it when you're reading, it's very like almost as to coin the phrase, a seriousness, because it's
Yeah.
a serious house on a serious earth.
Yes.
I think it's a nice take on it because a lot of the times I do often see the Batman comics, except for I believe it's the Court of Owls, which was one of the last ones I read that also had a serious bit of a tone to it. But I like this take. It kind of makes you see just what kind of history Batman has had in the past and how it kind of reflects currently. It's hard for me to explain. There's something about it that I just really like. That it just makes it seem not real, but I don't know how to word it.
Superheroes are like American myths.
Yeah.
That idea is not original with me either. But, you know, like lots of different people write Batman stories, and they're not all completely compatible. And this Batman is a little bit of a departure from the sort of the mainstream Batman, or certainly the PG rated Batman that I'm used to from my own childhood. A lot of it's this book is intellectually ambitious, and it's trying to add an extra layer of sex and noir, but also literary allusions. Even the serious house on serious earth is a literary allusion. It's from a poem by Philip Larkin called Church Going. And maybe I'll link to that in the discussion board. It's one of my favorite poems of all time. It doesn't play a super big role in the story, but that's where the phrase comes from.
Okay.
I think before this opportunity to get all the information that you're sharing with us, I feel like I looked at comics in a way more superficial level. I did not think that any of their authors had any underlying depth to anything that they were doing. Just like make the pow and make the saving the girl and the bad guy goes away. You know, like I never would have considered the depth of what you're telling us.
Well, a lot of comics are that, you know, they're made for children or for Arrested Development cases. I
shouldn't laugh because I've experienced that.
To some extent, a book like this, and remember 1989, a lot of things are happening with comics in the 1980s. And in part, people who grew up with comics and really loved comics and superheroes, they're trying to grow the comics up with them, you know, trying to scale it up to people who are
right
with more grown-up concerns, still enjoy playing around in that universe.
And I can see that.
Some of the recent Marvel movies, I haven't seen many of them, but I think some of them are going in like a similar direction. They're trying to, okay, this is comics for grown-up people. We're taking the stuff you like, but we're trying to put a little bit more adult complexity into it. I wouldn't say your average Marvel movie compares to this book. I think this book is in a whole other league from that.
Oh yeah, for sure.
But even that is maybe a step up from the things we read when we were kids.
Yeah. I mean, there's a lot of crossing into changing the race and gender and ages even of previously restricted to men characters, like the Ms. Marvel and
Okay, yeah.
all of that that I've noticed. And what I don't have any problem with, because I don't have any sort of allegiance to any particular image. But I know my
Yes.
brother, who was way strict about that stuff, was like, there can't be a black Captain America, and there can't be a woman Ms. Marvel, and all this. And I'm like, it's not
Don't
your
say
best
that.
friend that, you know.
Don't say that too loud.
Yeah, he's something else.
He's gonna get in trouble. I think that's pretty silly. You
Oh,
know,
it is,
they're
but
fictional characters.
it's definitely like, there's just people out
If-
there that have that, this can only be this way and it can never be modified.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
I remember Megyn Kelly, who used to be on Fox News and now she does some other thing, I forget what, but she's talking about Santa Claus. And she said, obviously Santa Claus is white. Like Santa Claus just is white. I mean, get over it. Santa Claus is white. And how can you be so gross?
I have no idea.
Everybody,
It is gross.
if you're going to have that myth at all, or whatever you would call it, I mean, if you're going to pitch that to your kids and you're not a white person, why should they have this kind of basically slightly morphed savior figure?
Yeah.
But he's of a different race than you know?
And he's so benevolent.
Yeah. Obviously, Santa Claus has no particular race. You know, how can you think otherwise? And to me, superheroes are in sort of that same range.
Mm-hmm.
But you might just as well say, God is a white person. You know?
I remember growing up, my Hispanic household, and the pictures were of the white Jesus. And
Yeah,
then I would
yeah.
go to a couple of friends who were African American and they had their black Jesus pictures. And then as I got older and I started learning like where Jesus grew up, and I was like, he's neither one of those, most likely. Like he's kind of probably in the middle.
Probably.
But I was like, and how hard is it to just see him as a person instead of a ... But oh well. That's an argument for another time.
Or never.
Or never. Depending on who you're talking to, some of them will dig their heels in, fight their fight.
Well, I'm not a believer myself, so I sort of don't have a dog in that fight. But it seems to me there are people who write. One of my favorite writers of all time is C.S. Lewis, and he was a believing Christian. So, like, supposedly, Jesus is an incarnation of a deity. So, like, he had a human body and lived a human life, but that wasn't the whole of him. There was this other component, right? And that other component, why would you say it had a race at all? Or even a gender, which is another whole can of worms.
Yep.
But never mind. We can save that for another time or never. Anything else about
N-O-N now or K-N-O? I don't know. K-O-N now or never.
Any other points you want to make about Arkham Asylum or questions about it? Well, I appreciate the two of you turning up so that I didn't have to just talk into a blank camera. And I'll have to think about what to put on the quiz. I'm shutting off the recording now.